So I'd just like to say good morning to everyone. And I'm assuming it's morning for most of you, but I'm kind of curious. I'm going to ask everybody as they're coming in to put in the chat box where you're from, and make sure you share that with all attendees. So if you can just start putting that in the chat box as we're kind of waiting for people to jump on board here. But I'd like to welcome everybody back. I hope that most of you have heard the prior week's programs. We've had a great series of discussions, and I think we're looking forward to a pretty exciting discussion today, hearing about what the corporate real estate and corporate occupiers are thinking and seeing. And there's a lot of change and experimenting going on right now. So I think to figure out what's best, I've been involved in a number of conversations, and people are thinking about the office very differently. And now the Delta variant has thrown us another curveball. So why don't we go ahead and get started? With our fourth and final weeks of programs, we've had a great series of conversations, lots of interesting speakers, some fantastic comments or content. So welcome. Thanks for attending. It's great to have all of you here. I'm Bob Fox, principal at Fox Architects and publisher of Work Design magazine, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. Today, we continue a series of programs that Work Design magazine has put together in an effort to provide a comprehensive look at getting back to the office. We've called the program Work Design Flex because it looks at how much more flexible and multidimensional the workplace is becoming. And we hope that through this conversation, we can offer some insight and intelligence into what's happening and the opinions and the options that are best for you and your organization. And organizations are starting to get back in the office. So what does that look like? What are the issues? How are organizations dealing with that? And how is that shaping our work environments? So I think many of us are still trying to figure that out. Just to give you a little bit of background, Work Design magazine was started 10 years ago as a place where the industry could vet ideas and raise the bar for the level of knowledge that we as professionals provide. It's a peer-to-peer tool to share information, test new ideas, and improve the conditions of the workplace for all. The fundamental purpose is to be the resource to make the services that we all provide as valuable as we can, to understand the opportunities to improve the performance and experience for those people who work in the workplace. And with that end in mind, we're fortunate to have a great panel today to share their insights. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of the presenters and their teams. It's been great working with all of you throughout the entire series, and we really appreciate the support. We know everybody's busy, and it's great to have their generous contributions of their time and their expertise. I'd also like to thank High Point Furniture Industries for sponsoring this session. High Point Furniture Industries combines craftsmanship with a state-of-the-art technology to provide flexible, reconfigurable, and comfortable furniture solutions that encourage engagement in adaptive spaces. They have some great options, so be sure to check them out. And our other sponsors, especially Envoy and Nook, who are critical to support the conversation. We could not have these conversations without their generous support, so thank you very much. One announcement is that our final program in this series is today at 1 o'clock Eastern time. That's 2 hours from now. I am having a conversation with Jeremy Nooner from Google, and we'll be talking about what the future might look like. So Katie, if I can ask you to put in the chat the link for everybody to sign up to that, and be sure to join us at 1 o'clock. That should be an interesting conversation. So I'm very excited about today's program, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We have the top workplace experts from the largest corporate real estate firms, and these individuals are normally duking it out in a very cutthroat and competitive market, and they rarely have the chance to work together. But today, we're fortunate to have them here in the same venue and share what they're seeing out in the corporate occupier world. So we're going to discuss their perspectives, ideas, and questions on a range of issues and challenges that surround getting back to the office. One thing of note is that they all bring backgrounds from architecture and design into the thought conversation. So the conversation is actually going to look beyond the physical environment into some of the drivers and the policies that are shaping our work environment. Traditional standards are no longer valid, and there are more questions and increasingly rapid change. As a result, the workplace is receiving more consideration and scrutiny than ever before. And we're going to discuss how our corporate leaders and occupiers are thinking about the workplace in the post-pandemic world. And we'll cover such topics as diversity and inclusion, inequity, office buildings, amenities, and urban infrastructure. So we're very proud to have an amazing panel, and we're grateful to have all of you each participate today. It's exciting to have you here. I expect that most of everyone who's joined know who you are. Your reputations have well preceded you, and you guys need little introduction, but let me introduce our panel. So I'm really excited to have Lori Lewis from JLL. Lori is the global product owner of experiential space design and concepting. Lori is responsible for a product family within a larger suite of products supporting experience services and within the workplace. She leads a team of design professionals with diverse backgrounds in workplace strategy, interior design, architecture, product design, and hospitality, whose focus is on transforming office spaces into high-performing destinations that help employees attract, retain, and foster best-in-class talent. Thanks, Lori, for being here today. Antonia Cardone with Cushman and Wakefield. She leads the total workplace for the Americas and workplace strategy and change management. Antonia is uniquely positioned to help companies navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. She immediately experienced extremely high demand for her perspective and expertise on the workplace. Antonia is a leader of Cushman and Wakefield's Recovery Readiness Task Force, a diverse group of subject matter experts from across the globe. She was instrumental in the creation of Cushman & Wakefield's Recovery Readiness Guide, a how-to guide for reopening your workplace that outlines recommended practices and protocols for dealing successfully with the pandemic in the workplace. And all of that was based on Cushman & Wakefield's knowledge from their teams in Asia. Following the launch of the first Recovery Readiness Guide in April 2020, Antonia became a key spokesperson for media interviews, podcasts, webinars, and more. And I'm going to add to that Work Design Magazine events. So thank you, Antonia. And Lenny Beaudoin from CBRE, he's the global lead for workplace and occupancy design. Lenny oversees the integration of CBRE's global workplace occupancy and design practices and provides a competitive advantage through actionable workplace strategies, occupancy planning, design, and delivery of the future work environment. Lenny brings more than 20 years of experience in the field of workplace consulting and strategic facility planning. He's a recognized leader in the industry. Lenny has worked on engagements in a wide range of markets and industries, giving him an informed perspective of leading global trends in the workplace delivery. As the founder of CBRE's workplace practice in 2008, Lenny has built a team of real estate experts, organizational researchers, space designers, change managers, occupancy planners who help organizations think differently about their workplace. So thanks, Lenny. It's great to have you here. So let's jump in and get started. At the end of 2019, if you would have said that we would be going to a completely remote workplace, most of us would have probably said, no way, it can't be done. Yet this is pretty much what happened in the professional services sector in March of 2020. We initially treated it like a snow day, but then it stretched out 30, 60, 90 days. Now it's been a year and a half, and finally we're starting to get back. But things have changed from our attitudes and our health to the way that we work and think about work. We immediately and fundamentally changed how we interact with each other, and now we're sitting here in a Zoom call with people from around the world. Corporate office space was pretty empty, yet we remained productive. People's lives changed. We were isolated, spent time with the kids. Some of us moved to better locations and bought new toys. And now it's time to come back to the office. So what's that going to look like? So maybe to start out, if I can ask each of you to describe, in your own minds, what's keeping you up at night? What are the biggest hairballs or the most daunting challenges that you're facing in the work that you're doing? So Antonia, maybe if I can ask you to start out that conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. A pleasure to be here. So, as I think about what keeps me up at night, I'm very concerned about the people side of things. Given that we're all now experienced at working effectively from home in various ways, of course, given that there's so much uncertainty about variants and vaccinated and unvaccinated people bringing the virus into the workplace, given that all the economic forecasts are pointing up and suggesting booms, which means the war for talent and workforce mobility, I think is going to be the big theme of the second part of 2021. We've never seen the workplace and the workforce so closely connected. And then we watched the media and talked to our clients, and we're at risk of leaders saying one thing and people thinking or doing otherwise. And then what really happens where we get this conflict? Are we going to see people get fired because they didn't come to the office on the right day? I certainly hope not. And that's the tension that's really got me worried and keeps me up at night.
Lenny, how about you? What's keeping you up at night?
Well, I totally agree with what Antonia shared. I guess I'll build a more practical aspect that we're seeing now. And I'd say it like this. Pre-pandemic, we worked in a pretty predictable way, meaning we all had routines in which we managed and understood how to go to work and how to perform our work. And then during the pandemic, we quickly normed, Bob, as you said, in that adaptation period, to another pretty predictable and routine way of getting work done. But now as we're starting to gradually return to the office in greater numbers, this intersection between how we work in a hybrid way and how we work in person is creating some interesting challenges and nuances that I think we need to resolve in terms of how we connect, how you manage virtual and physical presence, what it means in terms of schedule. I felt like the last year and a half, I've been living my life in 30-minute Zoom intervals. And that changes when we come back into the office. And so I think it's going to raise the bar for how we create digital and physical infrastructure to support that. But it's a period of adaptation that's happening right now that's needed to be able to resolve those dilemmas.
Great. Lori?
I think I'll just add to it, all of these things, like I said, the human side, the decision making, how to adapt the environments are what our clients are thinking about. But what's kind of keeping me up at night is how do we help them move past the fear of the unknown and get comfortable with making some decisions and taking action. They really want to, but there is just so much uncertainty right now that we're finding a lot of our clients are just not comfortable with exactly what to do. And so, we're trying to give them the confidence to move ahead and be okay with not having the answers. This is really a unique time to show your humanness as a leader and to let people know that, I'm human too, and I don't have all the answers. And, let's work together to maybe explore some things and iterate and try to understand, like Antonia said, what does it really look like? How does this really work when people do start coming back? And so I think that's, one of the things that we're really kind of wrestling with and trying to help our clients solve. I think another thing is, just how do we get a seat at the table as corporate real estate advisors with some of the folks in our organizations that are maybe different than who we would have sat with before. In the past, it really probably would have been those counterparts on the real estate teams. And because so much of this is around workforce and the people, we're finding that there really needs to be much more engagement with human resources and some of the other leaders to really have those meaningful discussions.
Lori, you kind of raise an interesting point there. And I'm just curious, for the organizations that you're working with, are you seeing a typical set of questions, and how are those different from a year ago?
Yes, definitely the typical set of questions, and I would say a year ago, the questions were really about attracting and retaining talent. Everybody always wants to know what's the competition doing. How do we enhance client and employee experiences? Were all things that we were really focused on. Sustainability. How do we measure all these things that are maybe a little fuzzier than things that we've focused on in the past? How do you really manage? How do you measure satisfaction and things like that? So those things are all still really important, but I think now it's much more of a focus on, how do we draw people back into the workplace? And what if they don't come back? Like Antonia said, are we going to fire people because they're not comfortable coming back? I don't know. I certainly hope not. But, I think employees are worried about that. And those are the kinds of questions that leaders are going to have to answer, is how they're going to address those things. And, how do we build and maintain culture in a dispersed workforce? I know that's a concern of a lot of our clients. They want to give their employees that flexibility, and they recognize the need to do that to attract and retain, but they're concerned about, what does that do to our culture? And I think ultimately, how do we better align workforce strategy with workplace strategy? Those things cannot be separated any longer. They absolutely have to come together. And I think one other thing that I'll highlight that is a big area of focus for us is just wellness. And what does that mean? I think in the past, wellness in the workplace meant offering a fitness center, and that is not at all what it means any longer. I think employees are relying much more heavily on their employers to provide overall balance and helping them address their needs. Mental well-being and mental health is becoming a common conversation point in the workplace. And I think a year ago, employers would say, you have employee benefits, go get some counseling if you need it, or utilize your benefits to address those things. But that's really not, what we should be addressing in the workplace. And I think there's a real shift in that thinking now.
Antonia or Lenny, anything you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, Laurie was comprehensive there, but I had a couple of little twists. One question that we're getting is about about the change and its permanence. Is this a fundamental shift? Is this for the long term? Do we actually have to take action, or can we just ride it out? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a bit later, about some perspectives of corporates. But do we have to do something new and now? And then for those who sort of answering yes to we need to do something about it, they're just saying, how do we actually do this hybrid desk sharing thing? We don't know. We've never done this before. We've heard about it. Some fancy companies have been up to it, but how do I do it? What am I supposed to do here? So just a couple of extra thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think, Antonia, to end Antonia's point, and Laura, you said this as well, is this, if I was to say, the question that we're hearing right now is around how do we resolve this uncertainty at this moment? Because employees want to know what it's going to be. And the fact there's uncertainty is leading to some of the turnover in the labor market, for certain. But it's interesting, I was talking to an executive, and this kind of captions, Antonia, what you said, and they said this to me. They said, if we bet on being more flexible in the future and we get it wrong, we can adapt our strategy and bring more people back to the office. But if we bet on the office hard now and bring everyone back and people leave, we can't get a do-over on that particular issue. And I think this worries, that central issue worries C-suites greatly right now.
Interesting. Now, Lenny, let me ask a question here that might be a little bit on thin ice, but just so there's no bias. I want to, do you see any conflict at all between, workplace strategy goals and the work that you're involved with and the commercial real estate goals and, what CBRE does as an organization?
Wow. You are putting me on the hot seat, Bob, but I'm happy to be there. Well, I would say this, and I was thinking about this from the perspective and our prep calls with Lori and Antonio, and this has been a great process, Bob, to be involved in. But I would say if you measure your professional success by influence, it's never been a greater time to be a workplace strategist or a corporate real estate executive. Number one thing, real estate and workplace are parts of a classic problem, supply and demand. And I think what's happened and what's changed, I don't think these things are in conflict. I think they're actually in alignment. And I think that the fact that the C-suite has really leaned in to understand how a real estate strategy and an employee experience facilitated on site works together to advance their strategy are things where they're really trying to drive much greater harmony and alignment. So I think those two forces actually are accretive to each other. So organizations are saying, if I bet on hybrid in the future, can I use that as a reinvestment strategy by using my real estate portfolio more efficiently? Well, that drives capital reinvestment opportunities into things that Lori talked about, like wellness and employee experience, which make a huge difference. So I actually think C-suite are looking at this as a total proposition in trying to solve the cultural, strategic, and economic issues simultaneously, which really brings those functions together.
And let me build on that, Lenny. This is an opportunity for rebalance. Shift funds from one part of the organization to another and see the positive results of that.
Yeah, and I think this is the first time that I've seen leadership really look at the workplace as a tool, in terms of how they're utilizing their talent and, attracting their talent. So, Lori, there's been a lot of conversations about hybrid and going back or shifting to this hybrid model that's emerged. Can you describe for that what that is and, how it's unique? And, is there a standard definition for that?
Yeah, I don't think there is a standard definition. It really depends on who you're talking to, what their perspective is. I know we've tried to come up with standard definitions just within JLL so that we could, be on the same page, because we were learning that even within our different organizations internally that there was some misunderstanding and discrepancies around understanding. So, we've tried to define those, and we really look at it through three different lenses. The work itself, hybrid work, what that is, the workforce, and the workplace. And so, work is kind of like it sounds. It's the tasks that are being completed. And, it's supported by the hybrid workplace, but it's really more than, than the workplace. It's got to be those policies and the technology and the culture, and all those things have to come together to support the work. And then, of course, the worker is the one who's completing that hybrid work. And, the worker can now be doing that work anywhere and flexibly. And so there's, a variety of locations where they may perform that work. And flexible work and hybrid work doesn't just mean flexibility within the space once you get there, but it's or location, but it also means flexibility of hours of days of week. So, people are really looking for flexibility across the board. And then the workplace is really trying to balance those collective needs and individual needs. And so, we're finding that most, if you look at the research, the employees are saying we want to come back into the office some. We really miss being in the office, and there's certain things that we feel like we can do better and more efficiently in the office. But not all the time. And it's really got to provide us a different experience and a different environment and solve for things that we can't do at home. And so, we've really got to find how to foster those cultural and physical and emotional needs in the office place and really create that experience. And so we talk about it like a continuum. It's really not going to be cut and dry, and different organizations are going to approach it differently. But it's really about, where are the needs and where do they fall on that continuum between individual and collective, and work from home, work from office, and kind of where you fall on that spectrum.
We've got an interesting question here that I think is appropriate for this conversation. It's would love to hear your perspective on how to best meet individual needs within the workplace, beyond individuals being viewed as the problem versus a one-size-fits-all method. See, Lenny, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, first of all, I like the question, and I like the point of view. No, we're all different. In fact, it was interesting because I think this whole notion of coming back to the office or being more hybrid, really strong and informed opinions among senior executives vary on that specific issue. But I do think, in partly what's true is pre-pandemic, trends that were happening around a more distributed activity-based work environment were occurring, because the reality in how we work is we do different things during the course of the day. As a person who probably does very similar things to Lori and Antonia, the three of us all work very differently and probably have different routines. And we've thought about this one size fits all as a person in a place, or a person equals a desk. And I think organizations that have been driving engagement and strategy in this have long thought about how they create a more distributed network of places that actually align to what people need to get done in the moment. And they provide different technology and experiences and services around them. And while that's a big change for people to make, I think the pandemic has accelerated that notion of working in a much more connected set of venues where work is more appropriately tailored to place and other infrastructure related considerations.
Antonia, I'm curious, I think with this shift to hybrid and some of these new ways that people are working, are you seeing any patterns? Is it possible to categorize organizations that are back in the office or those that are more distributed?
Yeah, it's very challenging to categorize the solutions. But one thing I think we can categorize is the drivers that have resulted in new solutions being created. And frankly, every organization I speak with has a variation on a theme. So, and we've discussed already what that theme is. But based on the drivers, I think there's three, fundamental drivers that are stimulating organizations to move in the direction of change. And the first one's really about time. You know, there are those organizations who had to make a decision and had to change at this point, you know, through this pandemic experience based on, you know, some other factor related to their real estate. You know, so there was a driver that forced them to make a decision or a change. And then there were those who were able to wait and see, not forced to make a decision. The second driver is really around the sort of financial element. We know there are some companies, particularly here in Silicon Valley, but all around the world, who are exceptionally well capitalized and do not have to take action on the basis of their financial structures within their organization. And then we also know those who need real estate savings as soon as possible. I've found in my own client base, those who have very small margins and sometimes very high volume in the work, in the product or the work they do. They're the ones who've been really active to say, let's change it. Let's save a penny quickly while we can. So there are those who've really needed on their financial basis to make some savings quickly, and that's driven change to the workplace. And then the last set of drivers, I think, is around people. There are those organizations that really want to be seen to be progressive, responsive, innovative, and to sort of take that reputational position with their workplace and their people. And then there are others who have been sort of more reluctant to change. And I know each one of those continua has organizations all the way along that spectrum. But, you know, based on their drivers, we're seeing variations in the solutions that are coming forward. And so, you know, it's rather idiosyncratic, the response that they're taking to these drivers that are forcing change.
You know, I'm going to interject a sort of another question here, because, you know, I don't know if you guys saw the Wall Street Journal this morning, but both Apple, Google, and Microsoft all just reported their earnings, and they've all set like incredible records. You know, Apple, I think, made $22 billion in the last quarter. You know, they've been, you know, remote. And so I'm just curious, you know, does that play into their earnings in some way? Or, you know, do you think there's a shift going on there? And I'll throw that open to any of you, because we haven't really talked about that aspect of it. But or maybe Lori, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that is an interesting question. I don't know, you know.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
yeah, some of the companies you just mentioned, you know, my initial thought is that a lot of the companies you just mentioned are ones that, you know, because of the very nature of the pandemic and the shift in how we had to work, we're in a position to take advantage of that. You know, we did have to start working differently, and we did have to start shopping differently, and you know, and we became very dependent very quickly on changes and adaptations to technology in our home environments, and companies had to do the same with their infrastructure in order to support that. So, you know, a lot of those names that you threw out, I think, are ones that were just especially well positioned to take advantage of the shift in the way the world had to function during that period of time. You know, I think it will be interesting longer term to see how some of these companies respond. You know, since we're talking about real estate, you know, how do you ultimately look at real estate as being one of the larger cost items on a balance sheet? You know, how do you ultimately look at optimizing that in further support of profitability in the future? So, you know, I think, you know, we've all seen the articles and had the discussions about, you know, is real estate dead? Is the office dead? You know, sometimes you read that people and companies will need less space. Sometimes you read they need more because people are going to continue to expect social distancing. Sometimes they kind of net one another out. So, you know, I think longer term, it'll be interesting to see how these things kind of settle down. But I think some of the companies that are really benefiting right now it's just the nature of what they do that's put them in that position.
Lenny, anything to add to that?
Well, I'll reference a friend who many in this community probably will know, Ben Weber with Humanize, research in this particular area. And without misrepresenting Ben's good work in this, he really isolated on this notion of strong ties and weak ties, in the sense that I think we would collectively say organizationally, strong ties have remained strong. So my immediate people that I work with, I likely meet with them more and interact with them more in a virtual and digital capability. But my weak ties have atrophied during the pandemic. So the real answer to that question, Bob, is, and I think Lori frames it right, there's other economic considerations which are driving returns in those organizations, in addition to the way that they're actually working. But I think it's really a question of whether you believe weak ties in an organization materially influence productivity over time. I happen to believe that they do. And I think in some of Ben's research, it shows that companies that were more remote versus more in person during the pandemic likely outperformed each other, or outperformed those in some capacities. Now, again, this is a highly complex dynamic marketplace in which these economic returns are being realized. But I do think it really depends on whether you think that the organizational glue, those weak ties, actually drive productivity. And if you believe that, then I think a hybrid reality in the future is probably more the lane that organizationally will drive a sustained return in productivity.
Yeah. Lori, I guess I want to ask you, I mean, the workplace has traditionally been thought of as a tool to attract talent, and I think this is probably a related question. Is that still the case? Or are you seeing the search for the best talent disconnect from the workplace?
I think ultimately that remains to be seen, but, because of this, now always connected, always on world, the lines between work and professional and personal life have really blurred. And so I think this is creating some really new expectations around how and where and when work is performed. And, in order to keep employees ultimately engaged and highly productive, I think companies have to look at it with a fresh approach. And so, there needs to be a balance between giving them the right environment to have that high performance and conduct those work activities, but also supporting a human spirit. Again, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting and unique about this pandemic, is it's really forcing us to, focus on the human aspect side of us as complex beings that are completing this work. So achieving that health and that happiness and supporting the whole person is really something that's important now. You can't just give lip service to it. You really have to understand how to do that as an employer. However, the physical office, I think there is a common belief that it really is still the physical anchor, though, to company culture. And, that is ultimately important. And like Lenny said, I think what's interesting about kind of going back to the productivity question is, I think people and therefore a translation into companies, there has been a high level of productivity in this period of time. But I think we're starting to hit that period of time where it's, people are getting fatigued. And, enough is enough. And, how many hours can I continue to work, and how long can I continue to operate this way? And so, I think that, looking at the office as a tool to really support collaboration and engagement, and giving them that opportunity, for that break from that hybrid environment is going to be really important. And so that's where, the work that my team is doing is, we're really looking at how do you reimagine the workplace as a destination where employees really want to come. And again, they're getting things out of not only their work life, maybe their personal life that they need to kind of help give them that balance overall.
Yeah, Antonia, kind of taking that on the flip side, recently, I guess we've seen a lot more people leaving their jobs than ever before. What do you think is causing that? And are organizations trying to address the issue?
Yeah, it's a huge concern, and there are multiple reasons why people are leaving. Of course, it's never mono solution in that respect, but our Cushman Wakefield experience per square foot survey data of about 100,000 respondents since the beginning of COVID-19 has told us an enormous amount about how people are feeling. They're losing their sense of connection to each other and to the company. So they're we're loosely connected now. We've forgotten how good it feels to belong to a group of people working together for common purpose. Add to that, we've really worked out how to work from home. We've become comfortable. We've bought extra monitors. We've got a new chair. I'm no longer sitting at the kitchen table, or etc. I've learned. I know where the buttons are on Zoom now. I got this, right? So we've also got capability. And then there's, as to Lori's point, there's this sense of sameness and monotony, and people are reporting that they feel they're not learning through our survey. And that's, definitely building on this fatigue idea. And then, we watch the press and we see it in our bank accounts. The economy is recovering. Everybody is hiring. We all know somebody who's made a move in the last month or so. So it's really the easiest time in one's career to accept the call from a recruiter, to listen to an interesting story, and to go ahead and make a move. So all of these things are coming together. That's meaning that we're going to have this second half of the year theme around mobility. Organizations are deeply concerned about this. We've already mentioned it, especially those who recognize that their people are key to their business success ongoing. And so we're seeing lots of discourse about employee wellness, culture, benefits, Laurie mentioned, all combining to make the employee, anything they can do to make the employee feel more connected, valued, and to retain them. The economy going up and the disconnection of people from organizations is a really fervent environment to see change happen.
And Lenny, I guess, we've got leadership and we've got the workforce. Is there alignment there? Are people in organizations experiencing the same values, or is there a disconnect?
Well, I mean, different companies look at this differently. Some employers really care about what their employees think. Others not so much. And so I think that plays out, Bob, directly in that. I do, and I share Antonia and Laurie's perspective, that the workplace has to be a competitive asset for career development and engagement. And if it's not, your people are probably going to be more at risk, especially in a moment like now when the market is shifted to the employee over the employer. But I think to Antonia's point, so I think that varies, again, depending on organizational dynamics. But I do think one of the things that was true pre-pandemic and remains true now is that this consumer mindset of thinking less about your employees in a transactional capacity and more as consumers of an experience really resonates, and I think will be increasingly important post-pandemic, meaning the smart companies are giving choices to their employees to make good decisions. But as Laurie said, they're creating a destination they want to be. And so they're kind of winning on both fronts. They're driving that alignment and engagement in their workforce, but in a way that feels deliberate and intentional with their workers. And I think that's a really critical nuance in winning the war for talent.
And Laurie, I might ask you this question that, the best talent out there, is it attracted by the workplace or is it something different? Has that changed from pre-pandemic?
I think it's a multi-prong approach, I think, that ultimately attracts and retains people. I think the workplace is certainly, like Lenny said, it's a tool and it's an important one. And I think it is going to have to be considered differently and planned differently and utilized differently. But I'm going to throw a few stats at you here. Our research is telling us that 90% of employees want the option of working in a physical office space. So that's telling us that, yeah, the office is still important to people. They still want it. Do they want it 100% of the time? No. 72% of those people want a combination, of remote and office work. So they don't want to come all the time, but they do want to come to an office. And it is an important part of their connection to the company and an important way of getting their work done. But also 40% of employees are saying that flexibility is, one of their top 3 choices in a career decision. And one of those things that's really going to help them decide whether they're going to stay with their current employer, if they're getting the amount and level of flexibility they're looking for, or are they going to be one of that high percentage of people that's predicted to make a change. So, I think it's got to be, again, a combination of policy and place and all of those things that come together to really provide the right sort of working environment for employees.
I'm going to shift the topic of the conversation here and move on to diversity. And admittedly, this is not the most diverse panel, but Lenny, I'm curious. I mean, the system has been filled with inequities. How do you see those playing out? Is a flexible work arrangement, flexible schedules, working from home, et cetera, is that helping to reduce the inequities, or do you think that's exacerbating the issue?
Well, I would say it's situational, again, to my earlier point, but I like to think of inclusivity as a verb. It's something you have to actively manage. Many organizations think it's a campaign, but inclusivity in a hybrid future reality is going to take real active work around how you choreograph and curate your work experience. So yes, I think there are inequities when we look at some of the circumstances, obviously, workers have had to endure based on their circumstance in life, right? Different life stages have experienced this pandemic very, very differently. And those needs really require deep understanding and active management to overcome and truly create inclusive, I would say, work habits in which, and Laura, you spoke to this around policy, inclusive work habits which allow everyone to be their best selves at work. But again, that's something that has to happen actively, almost on a daily basis at a team level to manage that effectively. It's not a corporate campaign. It's not a corporate communication. It's a mindset among managers and teams in the employee manager compact in curating what will be, I think, a varied experience for most workers post-pandemic.
And Antonia, I might ask you, I mean, are you seeing organizations address issues through workplace changes?
You know, I don't think we're seeing good workplace change, physical workplace change solutions to this yet. Mostly, as both Laurie and Lenny mentioned, you know, organizations are dealing with diversity and inclusion and the challenges associated with a hybrid workforce through policy rather than through physical response. So I think it's really a bit early to tell, but I'm extremely optimistic that somebody out of the tech world is going to show up with some new, better solutions that will help us feel much more integrated and interactive than, you know, the few people sitting in the meeting room in the office and, you know, the few people sitting on Zoom saying, I can't see the whiteboard. Can you come onto the screen and use the virtual one instead? And I don't know how to do that and which button and all this kind of stuff. So I hope our technology friends are really going to help us get through this challenge. In the meantime, you know, organizations are really rallying around adjusting their policies to help balance the field.
I'm going to shift to another topic here now. You know, I think talking about the urban infrastructure and, you know, I guess, Lenny, I'm going to ask you this, you know, is getting to work still an issue? You know, how do things like urban infrastructure, traffic, transportation, and things like that, you know, affect getting back to work? You know, I'm going to guess that, you know, probably 60 or 70% of buildings are still relatively empty.
Correct. So yes, we haven't reoccupied office buildings in mass yet at all. And ridership remains fairly low in public transportation in most major markets. Certainly it is in New York where I'm based. But what's been interesting is we've seen vehicular traffic increase pretty significantly in most urban markets. So people are commuting differently and they're commuting in different ways. But again, it's been such a gradual return to date. We are starting to see reoccupancy happen here. Ridership, however, in New York is lagging, but vehicular traffic is increasing. And I think, Antonia, you probably have a perspective about that on the West Coast as well, which I would say would probably also be true in the Bay Area.
Definitely. Traffic's a problem, but you know, you can be the only person on the train.
Interesting.
And I think that that I kind of am thinking about the diversity and inclusion question around transportation even, you know, like Lenny said, it's interesting to see maybe there's a shift in people using their own car, and that may be kind of a safety and sanitation concern. But, you know, there's a set of employees that don't have that option. They can't afford a car, and especially in a place like New York City. So, you know, I think that is one of those things that's really interesting is, you know, how hard is it for certain people to even get to work and what's their comfort level in using public transportation? And, you know, where does something as simple as that, just how do you get to work, start to create a bigger divide between, you know, just that's kind of to me, an inclusive and diversity challenge all in and of itself.
Well, I think you've got the best jobs in the biggest cities, which are the most difficult to get to. So, you know, that's going to create an inequity situation right there.
Yeah.
Antonia, I'm going to ask you, office buildings. I mean, we've got a lot of them out there. How do they need to change, you know, as we emerge from this pandemic? You know, are there amenities that are more important, or what are tenants demanding?
Yeah, just to focus on amenities here for a second before we talk about building stock. The amenities race of the 20 teens has really changed. It's no longer a race to have the prettiest bocce ball court or the most exotic brew on tap or whatever it is that people were trying to do. We've moved further down the continuum from there. It's going to become more about how to host the best events, create the most magnetic reason for people to come to the office. A monthly team event where we work together in the morning and then we have some great lunch and a spirited game or competition and then we commute home, those kind of experiences. We're looking for, the easiest and most convenient way to get done what we need to get done when we actually come to the office. We need to share ideas, to spar off at each other, to come up with new things. Our work is about, the knowledge workers' work is about organizing lots of complex variables into some order. So, we want to be able to do that when we come together in the office. How can we actually, get to our rapid achievements and get through our agenda? So hosting effective meetings is really an underrated skill that we all need more training and improvement on. And in that way, we're going to be thinking about our work differently. We can't make everybody come to the office and then waste people's time with frustrating, pointless meetings that would have been more effective on video conferencing anyway. So the amenities in the workplace need to be about enhancing those interactions in a new way. So it's less about the space itself, more about what happens in the space and how the space enables what can happen there more effectively. We know that the whole kind of soul-sucking, windowless, meeting room is not good for anyone for any reason, and that's what we're really going to need to see change. So our building stock will need to respond to these things. The drive to quality continues. Light, access to the outdoors. Of course, power and data in a way that, we no longer even have to worry about. The buildings, our building infrastructure needs to be able to support those kinds of things. And I haven't even mentioned indoor air quality yet. And that, of course, given the pandemic is on the minds of all building operators and occupants. So, as I said, this flight to quality is not over. And we might see some buildings left behind in that race.
So Lori or Lenny, either of you want to add anything to that?
I would completely underscore everything Antonia just said. And I would say this too, what's interesting is this flight to quality. And I know that many of the participants, Bob, in this are designers and they are in the business of reimagining physical environments. I think there's going to be a lot of work to do to reimagine underperforming B and C class assets in office buildings that could be better used for other things in the future. So that's one prediction that I'd have, and I certainly, Antonia, support what you shared about that. I also would say, in this future reality, I think organizations are going to manage their occupancy much tighter, meaning they're not going to hold as much space vacant. They're going to more actively utilize their space. And in that regard, I think co-working is going to really be in high demand. Obviously, those organizations, the co-working organizations, and disclaimer, CBRE is in that business, have seen significant increase in demand. So flexibility as part of a building amenity to be able to flex up and down in terms of space demand, I think is going to be really important as a critical differentiation in most building assets going forward.
And I'm going to just tag on one more thing. Antonia touched on this. I think what's going to be a really interesting challenge, and maybe one that might take a little more convincing some of our corporate clients to invest in, is that service activation and technology enablement piece. So I think, we're used to, as real estate professionals and design professionals, we kind of buy into the investment in the space. And I think that's maybe easier to quantify sometimes. But I like what Antonia said, it's not just about having a great space any longer. It's about bringing it to life and really, making the journey to the office more of a, an experience where you're getting something more than just a great place to sit and do your work. So I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge in how we help companies understand that and kind of structure a business case so that they understand the return on investment in committing to that sort of investment in services beyond the space.
Well, Lori, I might ask you, I mean, how are organizations looking at technology in the workplace now? I mean, do you see a digital divide or can the workplace help to solve, the technology aspect?
Yeah, I think it absolutely has to. Great technology can help an organization perform at its best and be productive. It can help people be productive. But it has to be truly user-friendly. And like Antonia said, I'm fingers crossed. We've got some really smart people, I'm sure, out there trying to figure out the great tech solutions. But, I think meeting rooms and just AV are a great example. We had meeting rooms, probably more that didn't work great than did, but we had some good meeting spaces that worked pretty well pre-pandemic when everybody was in the room together. And then we all have learned how to work remotely and in similar environments and with similar technology remotely, and we've made that shift. But what we haven't yet had the opportunity to really figure out and test and practice is how do you do that truly hybrid meeting situation where you've got some of the people in the room and others that aren't, and how do you make that inclusive experience and one that is user friendly and seamless. And people again are not going to come into the office if they spend half the day trying to figure out how to connect and how to get logged on and how to make everything work. They'll do that 2 or 3 times and they'll go, this is not worth it. I know how to work at home now, I'm just going to stay at home. So I think that's a big part of it is just figuring out how to make it work. And that's not always, innovation sometimes can be very complicated. And so, I think it's about finding things that work well and work easily and provide that opportunity for more inclusivity and just an equal experience no matter where you're sitting.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left. And Lenny, I want to ask you, how has the office fundamentally changed from the pandemic? What do you see as the benefits and the pitfalls as we move forward and closer to the next iteration of our workplace?
Well, I would echo Antonia's point earlier, meaning the uncertainty around how this is going to play out has not led to a lot of significant renovation in investment overall to date, unless there's obviously some event that requires planning or consideration. Generally, that's what we're seeing. Predictions about how this will play out from work on the boards, thinking about the future of work. I would say we surveyed all of our managed accounts. The vast majority are pursuing activity-based work in the future. So thinking more about their office design, like an urban plan with neighborhoods and different communities of different types of settings, work settings. So thinking about greater diversity in the way actually the workplace is provisioned is, I think, something that's going to be pretty durable going forward. The other part that I think is happening is we are seeing organizations weigh this nature, as Antonia described, of kind of an event-based mindset in office space, which is driving up. And I know this was one of the questions from the panelists, but we're seeing organizations significantly plan for increased, for example, conference seats in venues for meetings, betting on the fact that probably more in-person meetings will occur in the future, more brainstorming, longer duration, different format type collaborative activities will occur in the office. And the third thing that I think we are seeing in the pandemic, and that I think will be significant, is we are seeing technology investment. So greater integration of smart building technology from how you enter and access a building, but around the idea of experience apps, and I know Lori can speak and Antonia can speak to this as well, but around experience apps, around digital connectivity tools, thinking about the building as a social network and how those functions together, we're seeing a pretty sustained investment both in integrated workplace management systems, digital applications, and smart building technology already occurring. And I think that will transform user experience pretty significantly in most office buildings.
One last question that I'm going to ask to each of you. If we look out to next year, what is the fundamental purpose of office space, and how has that changed? So, Lori, do you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. I think, it's just one of many tools that a company can use to build their culture, enhance performance for their employees, and support the workforce. So, it's a destination. It's got to serve a purpose that is just one part of the employee's work journey. It's, work is no longer someplace you go, but it's something that you do. And if done right, I think that the office can serve a purpose of giving you the opportunity to do some work easier or more pleasantly. And, and in a way that really binds you to that corporate culture and bonds you with your team and your counterparts.
Great. Antonia?
Yeah, I wish I could find who said this, but I heard that it said that the workplace is the body language of the organization and its culture. And, that means that we can really read a lot about a company and the people from how the office looks. And I believe that legibility will continue. I think that office will remain the only really sort of personalized or customized place where people come together. And that's why they'll come. They'll come to be together, to feel connected to the organization, to see what's important to the organization. They'll be able to read that through the experience of being in the office. It's not so much for focus work where we can sit and quietly get something done, because we now know how to do that from just about anywhere where we have our gadgets, right? So no need to go to the office for that, but we do have to go to the office to be together with our people. So the workplace will really be the proxy for the company culture, and those organizations that shift their workplace will be reflecting to their people how their thinking has shifted about people and work. Great.
Lenny?
First of all, Bob, thank you again. It's so great to participate with Lori and Antonia. It's like a masterclass among us of just learning from my colleagues in this. So I'll try and build on that. They say that one of the underlying elements of employee engagement is, do you have a close personal friend or relationship in the office that you work? And I would say, simply said, the office is a place that allows that to happen. And it speaks to everything I think that Lori and Antonio said about creating moments where that engagement and interaction and connectivity can occur to drive engagement in that organization, because that is durable and meaningful in the way that we actually think about placemaking.
Great. I think we've got time for a few questions, so I'm going to sort of throw these out there. One, what would be helpful for your clients in terms of CRE planning to make informed decisions? How can designers and workplace planners help?
Oh my goodness, that's our core business, right? We're all helping every day. How could we not help? I mean, our ability to bring experience from what others are doing, from our own previous experience in implementing some elements of this pre-pandemic, brings us to be really well suited to be part of the solution set here going forward. But it's a collection of stakeholders and experts that need to come together here. I think for the first time, and Laurie might have mentioned this, for the first time we're seeing deep partnership, especially between real estate and HR, to come up with the solutions here. And so, we can be at the front of that connection within the organization. I would say that from my own experience, my most successful engagements are where we have a very close sponsorship from our HR partners within an organization. So, we've got a lot that we can bring to the table, and our clients are asking that of us.
Great.
I would also add to that, I think one thing that, maybe the architectural and design community does really, without even giving a lot of thought to it, it's just a part of how they conduct their work, is, human-centered design, putting the human at the center. And I think now that, leadership is realizing how important that is. And so, like Antonia said, getting the HR lead in the company as a part of that conversation, I think that corporate leadership is really beginning to embrace and understand that truly putting people at the center, truly listening to the voice of your customer, who's your employee, and taking that into consideration about your policy, about your place, and all of those things really matters. And I think the companies that truly do that and not just provide it lip service will be the ones that will come out on top in that attraction and retention of talent.
This has been great. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to just thank you guys. This has been a great conversation. It's great to hear all of your perspectives and insights into people getting back to the office and the issues and the challenges that they face. So very informative. Thank you very much. This has been great. Once again, 1 o'clock, we've got a conversation with Jeremy Nooner from Google, and we're going to be talking about what the future of the workplace might look like. So thanks to everybody for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you again at 1 o'clock. See ya.
Thanks, Bob.